Okay, given my background in art history, I've had a number of people here at the conference ask me if my talk will be at all art historical. My interview in the current edition of the On Landscape magazine is pretty much. This talk, however, is not really. It's much more personal. It's actually an adaptation of an article that I wrote for the Photocascadia blog that was one of my most popular articles. It really seemed to resonate with people. And what I decided to do, actually for a keynote speech that I gave at a previous convention, was see if I could take these ideas and marry them with a lot more of my own personal experiences. And that went over extremely well. So I've adapted it yet again today, and I'm very excited to be able to kind of present to you an overview of my work through the lens of these life lessons that have really informed my work over the years, not only as a photographer, but much, much before that. Also as a painter, as a graphic designer, as an art historian and an archaeologist, because yes, those are actually creative pursuits as well. And what I've been able to do is look through all of the wonderful bits of advice, this received wisdom that has helped me to kind of stay on course when I felt like I was in those darker moments of the creative process. And I've picked out the ones that have most resonated with me and that have been the most helpful. And I think they, I hope, can be helpful to other people, but they also, I think, say a lot about where I'm coming from with my work. And maybe a little bit about where I'm going. We'll see. So I just want to start off with an image that, for me, at any rate, sums up my happy place. I am essentially an alpine photographer, a so-called adventure landscape photographer. I spent a lot of time in the mountains, and I grew up in the mountains, and that's where I feel most at home. And this photograph, to me, really represents what it is for me that keeps me going, keeps me in the mountains, keeps me photographing them. And that is that sense of awe, of course, but also there's something about just having a wonderful atmosphere around the way that it's always changing and moving. It's exciting. The sense of remoteness I really enjoy. I love that when I go to a lot of these places, I tend to be the only one around, or else it's just me and whoever else has come with me. And I, of course, love when there's great light and everything just comes together and I can really concentrate and really feel as though I'm really being me and that I'm able to be creative. And ideas are just flowing, and I'm engaged, and I'm in the zone, and that is an awesome feeling. And really, there's nothing else like it. And those are the moments I think that keep us going. And that's really when it's all easy. It's easy to be yourself and to tap into what it is that is meaningful to you and important in your ideas when you're in that kind of frame of mind. You know, sometimes everything just goes really well. For example, this time when I was out in the Mojave Desert and this rainbow came out and just stuck around for about an hour. You know, rainbows aren't supposed to do that, right? They're the thing that you're supposed to dash off to catch because you see it in exactly the wrong place. And it's all you can do to get there. And right when you do and you get set up, of course, it's faded and it's gone. That's just how rainbows work. But this time, no. Now, that rainbow came out, and I'll be showing you a picture later when I was actually shooting a composition that I already liked. And then this rainbow, this one, just dropped right down into it, the left end of it, perfectly in my frame. I just thought, are you kidding me? And it just stuck around for at least an hour. And I'm scrambling around thinking it's going to die at any point, and it just didn't. And I actually had time to remember, oh, I'd seen these really cool arcing forms in this other playa, quite a ways from where I was. And so I went running over there to see if I could align them with the rainbow. And the rainbow was like, it's all right, I'll wait. And it just hung out there, and I got there, and it worked. It worked perfectly. The rainbow is pretty much in exactly the right spot to finish off this composition. And then it continued to stick around, and it came back. They move throughout the day as the sun moves. But it got to the point where my friend who was with me was saying, "Can someone just get that rainbow out of my shot? It's kind of in the way." Just had enough of rainbows, but it was great. So that's when everything's really, really easy, right? And then there are the other times when it's just not, when things just aren't going really well. Like when you're out in the desert for a week, primitive camping, and it's really hot, and you haven't seen a cloud in about a week. You probably haven't had a shower in about that long either. And you have all these motivations, these ideas, things you want to do that depend on certain conditions. Maybe it's not skies. Not everyone's into great skies, but there are always conditions that can make or break an idea. And sometimes that can really weigh on you and get you down, and it can distract from that creative process of seeing. You can get so focused on something that you really want, and when you don't find it, these can become real drawbacks to the whole process of coming away with something that you feel is personally satisfying. And ultimately, I believe that is the most important goal, really for me at any rate, and I think it probably should be for most photographers, is that ultimately what you want to produce is something that's personally satisfying. But lots of things can get in the way, and it's not just these sorts of unfortunate circumstances or difficult experiences. There are external factors that can be distractions to the creative process as well, things that can get in the way of you connecting with yourself and staying on course. Social media is increasingly becoming a big one for photographers, especially for those of us for whom a large part of our income kind of depends upon being able to reach people through social media. I teach a lot of workshops, and so I need to put myself out there on social media. It's sort of a necessary evil, and it can be a real distraction. I've had a lot of people tell me that they are really sort of anxious about social media because they feel as though not only that they want to do well and they want to reach people, but also that now it, to some extent, has turned photography into sort of sport because everything's measurable now. That photo's better than that one. This is my best photo according to the world. And that all of that diverts attention away from what you really care about, which is your favorite photo, and that sort of thing. When you have the world constantly judging in such measurable ways, it can be really distracting. It can get you off course and get you thinking about, well, maybe I should be going more in that direction because that's where the rewards are. And that can be tricky. Another one is just the whole realm of professional activity. For any photographers who make their living this way, you've got the websites, the selling the workshops, the selling the prints, to setting up an exhibition or whatever it is, and it can be very easy to sort of work towards those goals rather than coming from a space of inward out. You can reverse that process by trying to take things from the outside and sort of make them fit inside somehow, and that doesn't always work. And so professional considerations, contests are another one. I haven't entered a contest in a really long time, but I do judge them a lot. And I recently judged the Epson International Panel Awards, and I had a surprising number of people contact me with these anxious questions about how they could do well in the contest. And I thought that's really unfortunate because, I don't necessarily, I fully understand that range of concerns, and I fully understand why someone would want to be in a contest, and I think they're great, and they actually have their benefits for creativity. They can be a way of really motivating an artist to do whatever it is that they do. So long as that's what it is, it's a good thing. If it pulls you away from whatever it is that you do, not so much. Other distractions might include just basic practical considerations. Safety is a big one for me since I work in the wilderness a lot. But just over a year ago, I actually went through a certification course to become a wilderness first responder. And this was about 90 hours of study and training, and which is just enough time, really, to introduce you to pretty much every possible way that someone can have a really bad day in nature. I mean, these weren't things that necessarily were new to me, but once you're exposed to the incredible number of ways that someone can have something really horrible or painful or debilitating or even fatal occur to them, can really kind of pile up in your mind and make you think about that a lot more than maybe more creative concerns. This is a picture of me restocking my medical kit. Not all of that goes into it, but I just had everything out, and I thought, well, that's interesting, and that this is actually an aspect of photography, that you have to go through this, and when you do, put it all together, it really makes these possibilities very real. Sometimes that's good. Of course, it's good to be safe. Sometimes it can have the side effect of bringing about more kind of irrational ideas, and those can be problematic. This is an image of mine that I created recently in Death Valley, and on this particular day, I was doing something that I really love to do. I was out by myself, and I had seen that these amazing windstorms were coming. And because I love photographing blowing sand on dunes, and I'd done it a bunch at this point, and it's just become one of my favorite, most exhilarating experiences, I wanted to do it again. I had some more ideas I wanted to work with, and I made a plan to come out and timed it perfectly. Got there when the winds were howling. I couldn't barely stand up as I was walking. I've forgotten how fast the wind was, but gale force winds. And I got out there and I started taking pictures, and I was really having a great time. No one around, of course, because only crazy photographers would even want to be out in those sorts of conditions. They're actually not dangerous, despite everything I've just said. Being out in that kind of wind on the sand, if you know what you're doing, you can just go out there and have a nice time. So I wasn't concerned about safety. I knew I was just fine, well prepared for what I was doing. And then things started to get a little weird. So I was out there and I photographed this image, which doesn't feature the blowing sand. The wind had kind of died down in my area at that point, but it's turned out to be one of my favorite images. And it also reminds me of not only what I was able to accomplish by being lured out there by a motivation and then finding another one. This isn't something I could ever have planned for, that the clouds would come down and practically kiss the top of this dune. No way was I planning on this. This was not my idea, not what I was out there to do. I did that first, with the ideas that I did have. And then this moment came along. So this image kind of represents that successful moment of me being able to be creative in the zone, thinking, seeing, and responding. But also what happened right after this, so I was out there shooting, and I went a little bit further out on the dunes, and I was having a great time watching these amazing storm clouds come in. And there was all of this sand swirling around in the foreground. It almost looked like a sand tsunami, and there are these dust devils that are pretty common in Death Valley, and I'd seen those a lot, so I was kind of fascinated with it, and I knew that wasn't going to take me off to Kansas like Dorothy or anything. They're pretty okay if they come close. It's not too bad. So I went over closer to it because I wanted to photograph it some more. And all of a sudden, poof, everything went white. I mean, the whole world to me just suddenly turned white. And that freaked me out. I didn't really understand what was going on. In retrospect, I realized it was a cloud inversion. The clouds, having come this low, just finished the job and came all the way down. So now I was inside the clouds. And my first response was, oh my gosh, the sun had been completely snuffed out at this point. I was thinking, wow, I'm in some kind of cyclone or something. I wasn't thinking rationally. And so I decided, well, it's time to evacuate. And I think because I just finished that woofer course, the first responder course, I had all of these sort of irrational ideas in my mind, and the most logical explanation hadn't really occurred to me, which was that the clouds had just dropped down. I was thinking about the worst case scenario, this cyclone of sand coming at me and carrying me off. So what I did is instead of staying around and photographing what could have been some really unique conditions, I got out of there. And in retrospect, I look back and think, wow, this is very unusual. And as I was exiting the dune area, it was about a mile out, I was seeing these really great repeating forms of dunes going off into the distant fog. How often do you see that? Very, very rare. I've maybe seen 1 or 2 pictures ever of that. And that would have been really fun if I could have just stayed in the mind frame that I had been in. I might have yet another image that I really enjoy. So what I'm going to go through now are the 5 points, these 5 points that I've been able to pick out over the course of my education, starting from art school. Now, a lot of this stuff is, like I said, received wisdom. These are the sorts of things that address issues that most creative people face. And so art educators tend to focus on them. And a lot of this will probably seem like common sense. It's not necessarily, these aren't secret points or anything, and certainly nothing that I came up with. And it's probably the sort of, these are the sorts of lessons in life that I think everyone at some point really understands and knows and takes to heart. But I like putting them together and kind of putting a focus on them because I think these are the most important ones for me at any rate, the ones that have had the biggest effect on what I'm doing now. The first of these is to remember to have fun. And it's probably the most important as far as I'm concerned. I think that is the most important part of getting to that space where you are really being creatives, because creativity is ultimately a playful process. And if you start there, you're already in the zone. It's great if you can do that, if you can get yourself into that frame of mind. Now, sometimes it's just easy to have fun. Everything goes well, or, just crazy things happen. Like on this occasion, when I was shooting out in the Dolomites, I was with a workshop at this point, and we were out there shooting a sunset, and here comes this pink balloon flying over, and it stops right over us and just drops straight down. Now, we're out in the middle of nowhere. We are at about 7,500 feet in elevation, quite a ways. We've hiked in. This is a backpacking workshop. We're nowhere near civilization. So this balloon comes down. It drops right down into this World War I trench. And I went over to retrieve it, and it had this note on it. And it said, our birthday kid has just turned 75 and would like nothing more than to receive cards from all over. So how fun is that? We thought, this is really great. And it really put us all in a great mood. I tied that little pink balloon to my backpack, and I walked around with it, following me around everywhere. And these are the sorts of things that buoy a whole moment, and everybody was in a really great mood after that. That's when it's all really easy. I'll never forget when I learned this particular lesson, that you need to have fun, because sometimes you do need to kind of consciously go back to it. And this experience is the one that brought it forward for me for those occasions when it's not like this. The pink balloon doesn't just land and let you know that it's time to have fun. And just as a stand-in for my experience, was actually in art school in a classroom during one of these really serious critiques. This image is just a behind-the-scenes shot of me working with some workshop participants in the field, just reviewing stuff in the backs of LCDs because they asked me to. So this is just going to stand in for that critique process, although this process is much more fun than the way it goes in art school. Anybody who's been in art school probably knows how just stressful it can be when you have to go into a classroom and you pin all of your artworks up on the wall, and everybody in the class has their picture up there, and along comes the professor and he peruses these images, and he will then hold forth and let you know exactly what he thinks about them. And then there's a discussion. And at the time when this idea of having fun really came forward for me was in one of these critiques when the professor was someone I respected greatly. He was one of these guys who was in all the history books, really loved his work. Of course, I really wanted to please him. So that put the emphasis on him, not on me, when I was producing my piece for this critique. And there were other considerations as well when you're in art school. Everybody thinks, oh, this is your time to sort of cut loose and be a student and, produce your juvenilia and all of that. It is to some extent, but in my case, I actually also had a scholarship that depended upon getting good grades. So if it wasn't hard enough that, I wanted to please this really great professor, I also had that concern that, I needed a good grade. And I know I wasn't alone in this. So the professor comes in this one day, he looks at everything on the wall, and he says, everybody sit down, pull up a chair, come closer. He didn't say anything about anything on the wall. And he just looked at all of us and he said, it looks to me as though you've all forgotten to have fun. And that really hit home for me because he was right. I think we were all just so concerned. This is our first really big critique. Really so concerned about what he wanted or what was going to please him that we'd forgotten to go through that essential process, that essential playful, creative process that tends to produce good results. Sharing another image here just to get back on the idea of what's fun for me. This is a behind-the-scenes photo taken by a friend of mine, Michael Shaneblum, when we were out in Death Valley, again, one of my other favorite areas for photography. And we were out in this place that's called the Dot District, and I love this kind of thing where there is no obvious composition. You have this jigsaw puzzle of options there, and you can just play with that all day, and I can do that for hours. I love thinking through the various foreground compositions that you can get out of these sorts of environments. And when the light is nice and it's all, and you're the only ones out there, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And again, to return to the other side of things, that trudging through the desert, that process of scouting is just the opposite of that. When scouting actually becomes something that you feel like you have to do. You're not seeing anymore at that point. This particular hike was miles across this very difficult, this difficult terrain with some friends. And I think it started in a great place. We were all in a good mood, having a good time, shaking mud off our boots and everything. It was really messy. And in the end, it ended at a different place. It got a little rough at the end, and I think we were pretty down. And that image I showed previously of us back at camp feeling a little run down followed this. I think that was the next morning. So how do you turn it around? Well, sometimes you do have to do it consciously. This was an example of something that I think any landscape photographer has a really distinct motivation might understand well. We tend to plan things, a lot of us, not all of us, and I don't always, but it is one way. Once you've been to a place a number of times, you've developed a relationship with it, you start to have pretty specific ideas about it sometimes, and something you really want. You saw some potential for something, and you want that. Well, this is one of those places. It's an Alpine Lake in Slovenia, where I had done quite a lot of photography. And on this particular day, I wanted to hike up to this lake and shoot a mountain scene in the opposite direction from the ones that I'd done before. I had done this before, and I had done it before in winter. And it's usually a snowshoe hike up about 2,700 feet in elevation. So it's not super simple, but it's something you can do. You can get up there in a day in winter. So I was really excited about going up there and having all this great snow and really cool conditions and everything. All of my research for the weather and everything had shown me that this was going to be a possibility. So I was excited. And here's a better view. This is all from Google Earth of that lake. So there it is, and that's the mountain that I hadn't shot. I hadn't shot in that direction. That's the mountain that gives the lake its name. So I kind of wanted to work with that. I had an idea of something I wanted to do, and I was pretty determined to get up there and give it a shot. But when I got up there, there wasn't even any snow. hardly. I didn't need my snowshoes at all to get up there. I had my crampons, my ice axe. I was ready to go. And that just wasn't on offer. So I got up there for a while I was thinking, got all the way up here. There isn't even any snow. The trees are all dead. This is in one of those sort of, I call them the tweener periods, when you're kind of in between seasons. And there was, however, one really amazing condition to work with there, and that was that the lake, which freezes over every year, this is a frost hollow that gets very, very cold. The lake this year didn't have any snow on top of the ice, and that hadn't happened for 10 years. So I was kind of having a nice time just sort of running around on my crampons and noticing all of these great bubbles in the ice. And some of them were pretty impressive. You can just see a few little ones here, but some of them were really beautiful. And now bubbles are kind of a favorite thing for landscape photographers too, but I wasn't expecting this at all. There are places that lots of people that are go-to spots for shooting in bubbles with mountain, that sort of thing is very common, and I've seen some great bubble abstracts, but I had not, that was not on the menu, and so it wasn't something that I'd really thought about, and I just allowed myself to let go of my ideas. I remembered just let's just have some fun with these. This is really a nice treat. This is a gift. I didn't get what I wanted, but this is really great. So I really got into the bubbles, and I just went with it. Even though I'd hiked 2,700 feet up in these really kind of cold conditions to go shoot these little itty bitty bubbles. So it was something that I think, in a different frame of mind, I wouldn't have thought to do or wouldn't have wanted to do. I would have been kind of depressed that I wasn't getting what I wanted, because it's a lot of effort to get up there. But I really got into it, and I shot these bubbles wide, I shot them long, I shot them for days. I shot them in flat light, I shot them in broad daylight, and this is the actual setup for the final shot, the one that I produced that I really liked. It's a telephoto shot, actually focus stacked, because in order to get all of the bubble cluster into focus, I had to take a whole bunch of exposures at different focal points and put them all together. And so here's my wonderful lake shot with a sunset and a mountain and a lake. Looks like that. And this is not an image. This is an image that I find personally satisfying. I really enjoy it. I've called it frizzante because to me it looks like sort of a light sparkling wine, and it's fun and it's bubbly, and it represents that whole process of just going out and having fun and doing something with the ephemera that is ultimately really meaningful. I also, on the way up, encountered some of the largest hoarfrost crystals I'd ever seen in my life. So that idea of having fun had already started before I started shooting the bubbles even. And I produced some images that to this day I still like, that are of those hoarfrost crystals. I'd seen a lot of really impressive ones even in the Canadian Rockies, where there's you can get some pretty great examples of it, but nothing like this. These were huge. And they were really fun to shoot, so I had a lot of fun with those too. Another way that I go about having fun is using my phone instead of my big camera. And I know that a lot of people do this too, and I think it's very recommendable. Sometimes there's a certain amount of seriousness and weight, literally, that comes with using the big camera, and it can help to kind of put that down for a while. And for me, at any rate, just take the phone out and play with it. And it's something about not only the fact that it's light and easy and portable and everything, but just something that divorces me from the seriousness of the real kit. I find really helpful. So here I am out in the Mojave Desert on some of the largest mud tiles that I've ever seen in my life. The cracks are big enough that I could fit my DSLR with its ultra-wide angle lens down in between them. And this was really a great jigsaw puzzle for me, and took me a while to sort it out, but I ultimately came up with this image, which I really liked, and this is when I spoke about the rainbow dropping down into my scene. That's what happened. I figured out this composition. I practiced it for a couple of outings until this morning when I got the light and I even got the rainbow, which I wasn't expecting at all. It just dropped right down in there. So I don't know, sometimes magical things happen when you're going out there and you just let yourself have fun. Another anecdote that I think is relevant here, this is a trip that I recently took with my good friend Ted Gore. We were out in the French Alps exploring one day, just sort of looking for whatever. We wanted to find what might be out there, and we didn't have any really set ideas about what we were doing or what we were looking for. We were just looking. Just having fun was the idea, but we weren't, because we just had come from teaching a 10-day workshop. We were pretty run down. I'd actually been teaching workshops in the mountains all summer, so I was really run down. And mountains are a big place, and trying to explore them takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I think we were really letting that wear on us. And we'd gotten up to this point with this lake that is quite charming, and it's not even very hard to get to this point, but we were already pretty exhausted. This is only, I don't know, a couple hours of hiking to get up here. And really the mood for us was pretty down. And I don't know what prompted us to do this. I think maybe seeing this little stone pathway across the lake is what did it, because that was so fun for us and so unusual, and not something we were really expecting. But we thought, let's just take some selfies. This isn't something that we normally do. Some people specialize in this. Instagram has a whole sort of industry about that. And I don't tend to do that myself. I rarely have figures in my shots at all, but that's what we decided to do. Like, let's take a break from this scouting mission for a while, and let's just have some fun. So we did that for a while, and it turned things around instantly, just to snap us out of that funk that we were in. And what we ultimately did was a lot of scouting that day. May or may not have produced photos. We took some the next day, but I think it was some really quality scouting. I felt like we were really seeing, and it's just a place we'll have to go back to and keep working it. I'd like to go back at any rate. And this process of having fun really got me to the point where I feel like I now know the place. I have started that relationship, and I'm ready to go back and continue it. Sometimes having fun just means switching up a lens. It can be that easy. That can be the thing to get you out of that funk, I've found. This is a photo, actually, I consider a work in progress due to a horrible story that I'll spare you right now. I've lost the shot and was never really able to process it the way I wanted to. But it's one of many that I've taken at this location. This is a spot that I discovered years ago while scouting, and I discovered this alignment of the rising sun with this particular very handsome peak. But one day I decided to go up there and try some telephoto stuff. And I'm standing very close to the same spot. I was actually teaching a private workshop at that point. And the guy who was my participant who was working with me was by my side, and he was actually shooting wide in that other direction. And I was just poking around on my telephoto, having a great time, because he was all set up and fine. He didn't need me anymore. So I started looking around for fun stuff. And sometimes fun stuff to me is not only me having fun or the things that happen or the conditions being fun. Sometimes for me, it's seeing whimsical instances of dialogues going on between elements in a photo. They amuse me. They come to mind. They may be it may only be I who see them. But in this case, I saw this peak looking up from the distance, like it was sort of photobombing the scene. And I really liked that distant peak and the way that it was sort of almost viewing over the top of its ridge there and looking back at the mist coming in and swirling around this little hill in the foreground. And to me, that was really, really great fun. And I had a lot of time, a really good time photographing this. And to this day, I really, for me at any rate, I'm very happy with the photograph. I really love these kind of misty, quiet photos. And it was really nice to be able to come away with one that day. This is another one. This is out in the Grand StaircaseEscalante National Monument area of the American Southwest. And what really charmed me about this scene is the way that this butte looks very much like a big shark fin cutting through the desert. To me, that's really fun. So I loved that idea, and it got me in that playful mood, just thinking about that. And I actually, at the time, I had just gone full-time with my photography, And this to me had all kinds of meaning too. So it kind of started to get really deep. After the playful process, I was thinking about, I kind of feel like I'm in a way in jeopardy. I'm in the deep end here. I hope this can work for me. So the idea of sort of being circled by a shark, was very real, and it brought all of these sort of vivid ideas to mind that I think helped me work through what I wanted to do with this location. And I see these sorts of things all over. In this case, I saw this, what looked to me, the clouds were echoing the form of the mountain. This is what I refer to as an echo composition in my writing. So I saw the shape of the mountains looking very similar to the mountain itself, the shape of the clouds. And I loved the way that it was sort of like this specter looming up, like, trying to be scary behind the mountain, almost trying to maybe even mimic it, like a doppelganger back there. And I thought that was really fun. And these sorts of instances really helped me if I just sort of run with those ideas mentally, they keep me going, keep me away from all of those other distractions that might be weighing on me. I stay focused on that. A last example, this is again out in Death Valley. And on this particular occasion, I was teaching a workshop with my co-leader, Ted. And we had brought this group out onto the dunes, and it's a pretty good march out there. You'd go about at least a mile and a half to where the spots that we like are. And we had a fantastic outing. These are sort of weather chasing workshops that we do, and people love that. And so we'd gotten rainbows and sunsets, and we had all the stuff that a lot of landscape photographers who are into the scenics really want to get. And we had a great time. So everybody was feeling pretty good about what they got. And when the raindrops started falling and the storm started rolling in, most of the participants were ready to go back. So Ted escorted them back off the dunes, and one stuck around. And he was a 70-year-old participant, good old Carl. Carl, despite his age, would go anywhere if there was a good shot to be had there. He wasn't real fast, but Carl would get there. He was the most enthusiastic participant I'd had in a long time. And so he's out there, and I saw him looking at the same thing I was looking at, which were these wonderful storm clouds coming in. They're just so shapely and so moody, and the blues, and they completely change the whole color of the dunes. They go from these warm hues to these steely colors that I just love. So I looked over at Carl, and I could see he was sort of looking, and I was looking, and I just said, "Carl, do you want to stay?" And he looked at me, and he said, "Yeah, I'm having fun." So I can come up with a million different examples probably of ways that I have fun, and I'm sure that others can come up with more. This is one of the more silly instances of me just waiting before the light that I really wanted was coming, and I just filled the time by making good on a dare to do that. So create that video. That was really fun, and that definitely lifted my spirits that day too, which had been a bit down before that. My second point, and this is one that can often be misunderstood, is to go big. Some people, as I did, misunderstand this point to be, well, you should go big with your prints, or you should go shoot big mountains, or you should go look for epicness, or you should go really remote, or you should just have a big idea and come up with a big idea and do that. And that's not really what it's all about, although I believed that too. You always hear this, go big, go big. Until I realized that it doesn't mean that. It's not the size of the finished product or the size of the mountains or the epicness of them or the grandness of the landscape that matters. It's the extent of your ambition. If your passion is pointing you towards a particular motivation, the idea is to ask yourself, what is the fullest expression of that idea? And do that. So essentially, don't sell yourself short and don't tell yourself you can't do it. Don't listen to those voices in your head that say, well, that would be very hard, or that would be very expensive, or nobody would like that, or whatever it is. Don't stop short. Go go big. My biggest project is kind of big on a lot of levels. It does involve big mountains and big scenes and a lot of hiking and all of that, but I'm now going to show you how that all came together for me and how it actually enabled me to make more personally satisfying images, because I wasn't doing any of this because I thought I should or I ought to, or because it's big and that would be impressive. I was doing it because I gradually, organically, naturally evolved into a love for these sorts of environments and decided that, well, if I was going to take it to the level that I wanted to, I was going to have to do some certain things. And that meant getting out into the mountains, getting higher, going for a bigger approach than what I had already been doing. And I focused ultimately on the Dolomites for this. At the time, this was about 6.5 years ago, I hadn't seen any photos of the Dolomites. I actually had trouble finding them. This is back before the days when, this is when social media was just sort of starting to get going, and it was actually pretty hard to find digital photos online of the Dolomites. And the books that I could find, it tended to be these valley views. And this is an early photo of mine that is just that. I went and I found this little church. This, at the time, when I put it out, this is the early days of social media, I put it out on 500px, which at the time had just graduated from being a forum only to actually being a website. And it was my first photo ever to go viral, and it was, at the time, it may still be my most stolen photo, too. So that's where I started. I found this little church, and at this time, I hadn't seen any photos of it, but now I've seen a lot. I've actually seen ones that I like a lot better than mine. But that's a beautiful, beautiful area of the Dolomites down in the valleys and everything. But I was really curious about, well, what's higher up? I wanted to get into the high mountains that I wasn't seeing so much in pictures, aside from more telephoto shots from accessible vantage points. So I got a bunch of maps. Lots of maps. And this was expensive, and I didn't have a lot of money, but that's what I did because I couldn't think of any other way to do it. So I have literally a huge box of maps. And I just went through what I had learned from my first outings there in the region. I had a good sense of where the tree line generally was and what sorts of features might be photogenic. And I went through all the maps, and I put these little markers on them, like that orange one there, and I tried to target possibly really rewarding areas for me. And I had to do a lot of hiking that wasn't necessarily what I was used to. So I also really got more into mountaineering through doing all of this. And some of this stuff is actually kind of treacherous. This isn't the sort of thing I do in my workshops, but it was what I needed to do to get around. There's a lot of these via ferratas, and there's a lot of scrambling, and there's a lot of heights involved and cliffs, and I scampered all over the place for years. And I found a lot of places that were great, and a lot of places that just weren't, and it was just a lot of work to get there. So it was not necessarily a very productive use of time, but I was having fun, and it was great, and I was really excited about exploring these areas on my own because I felt as though they weren't necessarily haunted by the ghosts of a million other photographers, and I could actually hear my own voice there. Some people are really good at tuning that out, and for me it helps if I'm in a place where I can kind of think it through for myself on the first outing. So these are all from a one particular hike, but they stand in for the sorts of things that are necessary if you want to really get around, really explore, find out what's out there and what you can do, including going to some more popular areas. This is an area that I could find in photos, and I fell in love with it instantly. I really wanted to go do something of my own there, and it started off with some summer shots, ultimately got into winter, working winter shots there, only just this last winter, actually. And this is a shot this is behind-the-scenes photo of me taking a photo, and I owe this one to my friend Ted Gore, who took the picture of me. And this opens up, as many photographers know, a whole other wonderful world of photography if you just sort of think about even a different season Sometimes that really can be going big too. It means that you're having to do things that are pretty difficult. So in this case, that means getting on the snowshoes, and the hut that's closest to this massif was closed, so we had to stay at the one that's about an hour hike away, and it was a lot of elevation for snowshoes before sunrise to get down for this sunrise. But that's what you got to do. If you got an idea, it's all good. It feels great. I actually even got frostnip while I was trying to make this photo, and it was difficult to stand up. The wind was pushing me over. That's why I would crouch down like that. Sometimes it meant, getting up and doing a lot of these crazy hikes that I was just showing you before sunrise, and then, sleepily perching myself on the edge of some cliff so that I could get something done, and that's that photo there. But I did find a lot of great stuff, and it was really, really rewarding. So I was out there not letting myself say, this is costing me a fortune, I am wasting all of this time, I only occasionally find anything that really resonates with me. But I pushed on, I persevered, because it was something that was coming from within, and I wanted to express that. I wanted to go big with these ideas. Another one is, this is one of my very early winter shots from the Dolomites, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And again, a headlamp hike before sunrise isn't necessarily easy, but somehow it is if you're coming from that space of you just want to do what's the fullest expression of your idea, you'll do it. And this also extends to, I think, processing. Not everyone is into this. They don't like putting in a whole lot of chair time. I don't mind it. I actually kind of enjoy it up to a point, and I'm fine with it. In this case, this is a focus stack of a lot of images, and so if I get out there and I realize I've got fast-moving weather, I've got a foreground that's inches away from the front element of my lens, I've got a background that I'd also like to be sharp, I've got high dynamic range, I've got a lot on my plate there if I want to produce a photo of that. That's a lot of work, but then you just have to get into that, at least for me, that mentality of I'm just going to do this, I'm going to go big, this is what I want. This turned out to be one of my most popular shots. It's an older one now, but at the time, immensely personally satisfying to finally get this thing done, and to have something that reminded me of everything that I had wanted to achieve and more. This is another instance of an earlier shot. This is an area, a very famous massif. Again, this is the Tre Cime di Lavarito Massif in the Dolomites. If there's anything that can really be considered an icon in the Dolomites, it's this. I think it can at this point. When I first started going there, I didn't even know that. Because I didn't know that, I also didn't know that the go-to vantage point is directly opposite this, completely other way from where you park and start hiking. And where most people go is over by this other hut where you can literally sit on the porch and sip a cappuccino while you click away, because it has this really easy view towards the mountains. And for a long time, that was almost expected, I think. Especially I've heard Italian photographers tell me that, yeah, well, that's just the way you're supposed to do it. That's the way it's done. You shoot from there. Well, I didn't know that at the time, which is good. So I went around the other way, and at the time, I'd never seen a shot of this stream. Now I have, and now I take a lot of workshops here, and so there are loads of pictures of this stream. But I love this stream, and it was really fun to find it and to work with it and to figure out how I could put together a story about the process of the snow melt, which was happening in a really dramatic way that year. This is seasonal spring that doesn't exist all year long. And this is the picture from the one I was showing of me on the snowshoes earlier. This is what came out of that. I really wanted to catch that process of weathering. This is what happens, to these craggy mountains that makes them so fantastic. That process of the weather kind of eating away at them, and the snow blowing over the sastrugi was a shot that I had wanted for a long time because I had seen it, I had tried and had failed for various really sad reasons. And so I finally put something together just this winter that, for me at any rate, is immensely satisfying, and I'm happy I've got it, but I had to go pretty big to get it. This is another instance of a time when I really scampered around a lot and almost found nothing. I often liken myself to the way that cats are with boxes. If I see something on a topo map that's blank and there's nothing in there, nowadays that's where I want to go. I just want to find out what's inside that box. And this is what I found. This is an area that's pretty blank on the topo map. It's not indicated as anything interesting. And there's this really cool double waterfall there with this snaking stream. And it was really exciting to find that. Again, seasonal, and I'd never seen anyone work with this, and so I was able to kind of clear my head and have a great time with that. But again, a lot of scouting just because of that sort of mentality of this is my project now. I've organically arrived at this idea that I want to explore these areas, and by golly, I'm going to do it. Another one, very high up in the Dolomites. To this day, I've never seen another photographer in this area that I didn't bring there myself. And I've been able to produce a couple of my favorite photos from this area because of that very mentality. And now this is one of the photos that participants most request this composition is one that most of my participants want to visit and see how it actually looks. And they like to shoot it, so now I've been taking a lot of people there, and that's immensely rewarding too. I really enjoy that, introducing these places to people. This as well is one of those areas that's out back and way far from anything that most people would ever go to. It's one of my more moody, darker images, and to me it sort of sums up the creative process in general, that it is kind of a dark place a lot of the time, and then in the distance, there's that sort of that light that you're moving towards, and that's the light within. One other spot that I really like and I've been working on a lot is this little waterfall in the Dolomites, and again, just came from poking around. I actually have a video of how you get there. It's not obvious at all, so this is me rock hopping along to get over there. Just comes by. I actually came up with the idea by being on the other side of the stream a couple of years earlier and seeing that there were cascades of some sort. I didn't know that these were even there. They're kind of tucked away. Went exploring there with my friend Ted again, and we came across this waterfall, and I subsequently have returned many times to have a good time with that. It's really a fun place. I really enjoy going there. This is a picture of Ted standing on a rock. This is an image that has a lot of personal meaning for me. It's not one that I've ever released, and I may never. I'm not sure it fits in my portfolio, really, but I'll have to think about that. But at any rate, it's one of these things that to me summarizes this idea of going big, because you're out there, you're looking up at this idea, sort of metaphorically speaking, and you don't realize that you can get there. It looks like there's this chasm, but you can get across, you can get around, you can get up there. There's some way to do it. You'll figure it out. If you really want to, and that's your motivation, I think it's important that you do it. And of course, going big doesn't necessarily mean just going to the mountains. It can mean getting in the water instead of standing on the beach. It can mean getting out in the hot sun. Again, another behind-the-scenes photo that I owe to a friend. It can mean standing on, standing out in really windy conditions and getting some sand in your clothes, and not to mention your gear. Although there's ways to protect against that. It can mean driving 50 miles down a dirt road in a 4x4 and then hiking another 2 miles out just to catch a moonset. It can mean climbing higher, getting up higher than you've been before. It can mean exposing yourself to, yes, sometimes sort of dangerous conditions. This is a stand-in for a previous visit when trying to get a shot like this, broke my ankle because I got too close to a train trap, fell in it, and learned the hard way that rocks absorb heat and you shouldn't get too close to them in the snow. Which brings me to my third point, find the tipping point. And this one's very simple, and I'll be able to go through it quickly. It's related to the last one, is that sometimes just going big isn't enough. Sometimes you have to go too far, I've found. I had an art instructor tell me once that, in fact, you'll know the point where you've gone far enough after you've found the point where you've gone too far. So basically, push it. And I think that that's kind of true for portfolios too, even finished work. Sometimes you just do have to put them in that portfolio, and you think, maybe that's gone too far, but I'm just going to let that sit there and see how this all fits together in the end. And maybe at some point I'll say, yeah, that was too much, but now I know. And some examples of that in landscape photography for me is back to this shot. I shot this in all kinds of light. Once I found it, I was really excited about it. Ooh, double waterfall, snaking stream, awesome. And I tried really dramatic lights, really, brilliant sunsets, and nothing quite just sort of brought together what I wanted with the circular composition and the subtlety of the tones and everything. So I really preferred this soft light. So once I'd shot the super dramatic stuff, I pulled back, and I liked this slightly more quiet version. And sometimes a tipping point as well, like with the picture of me in the ocean. Is it enough to get to the side of the water, or do you have to get in the water in your ugly waders? Or do you have to traipse all over dunes for 2 hours only to find that the place you started was really the best point after all? And that's where the composition was? Yeah, we did that. And I owe this behind-the-scenes shot to a workshop participant. Really great shot, love it. Or in this situation where I tried my usual approach to making water more smooth for a long time before finally giving up and saying, no, I'm sapping this waterfall of its power. There was something about the water flying up into the air like that to me expressed the particular character of this waterfall in a way that smoothing it out didn't. I was just sapping it of its strength. And it wasn't until I tried and realized that those slower shutter speeds were going too far. And I pulled back and I got this raging kind of image of this, the raw power of this waterfall in the French Alps, and for me, personally satisfying. My third point, craftsmanship matters. And this may sound self-explanatory, and it's related also to going big. Sometimes you just have to dive in and do something, even though it may seem tedious. For me, that has meant that such things as returning to a composition again and again and again. That can be very tedious, and sometimes I don't like doing that at all. I just want to shoot whatever first comes, whatever I see, and that also has, actually more often than not, that produces the best results. But sometimes I see something and then I want to work it and work it and work it. And this one took me a long time. I did this comp probably 3 or 4 or 5 outings or something like that. And the moon was all over the place after the first instance, of course, because the moon's never going to be there again until you come back a month later. So I came back a month later. Again, a lot of driving, a lot of hiking just to get out there. But I made it work, and to me that's part of the craft. If that's your motivation and you want it to be a certain kind of lighting, I wanted this moment where the ambient light was coming and the sun was rising over my shoulder, the moon was just setting, and I had to nail that moment. Was very hard, and so I just kept at it because that to me is part of the craft, and I finally nailed this image. Again, the focus stacking and all the processing. I have a lot of these sorts of shots where you have a really high dynamic range, you have focus stacking, you have sun stars to clean up, but I like them. I really liked the way that the spokes of this tree echoed that sun star, and I really wanted that. Once I saw it and had the idea, I just knew I gotta just sort of roll up my sleeves and get it done. And likewise with this one, not easy to put that together. You have all of that going on. This is an example of when craftsmanship just involved simple gear. I'd first shot this on my phone, an iPhone, which has pretty high resolution, and actually for a lot of people that does it. You can do a lot with that, and I could have put this online and left it at that. But I thought I'm probably really going to want to print this. I was really excited about it. When I showed it on my phone to workshop participants, they went nuts, and they really loved it, and they wanted to go shoot that playa. So I actually went back with my phone and my big camera, and it was like finding a needle in a haystack, but I found that comp again, and I shot it for real. This is an example of one image that is probably the most technically difficult I've ever done. And in the interest of time, I'll cut short the story on this, but it was a lot to shoot it technically and a lot to put it together. It is kind of just, for me, the kind of craftsmanship that really tries on me, but I got it done. The last one, and I think this is probably as important maybe as the first one or second to it, and that is creativity is a messy place. So the caveat to everything that I've just said is that creativity works in mysterious ways. Sometimes we arrive at solutions without really understanding how we got there, but we can still feel a sense of accomplishment when we do. You know, we've all heard of the happy accident. Well, there's that too. We should be able to take pride in things that somehow just worked out for us, even though we can't quite explain why. And sometimes creativity is that. It is really very chaotic, and we don't really understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. We just know that that's what we do. And that's really important. So anytime I've used the word should, or I've said anything in this talk that sounds in any way prescriptive, just dismiss that. Because in the end, you have to just do what you do. This one last story I would like to tell has to do with a friend of mine who once confessed to me that he felt that he was kind of disappointed in himself because he was, instead of using his tripod a lot of the time, he would just sort of leave it stuck to his bag and would run off with his camera and shoot handheld. And that meant having to take a whole lot of images sometimes and do a whole lot of processing to produce something that ostensibly could have been done a lot more simpler if he'd just shot on a tripod. But that spontaneity that he got out of running around like that enabled some really unique compositions, enabled him to nail some moments of light, and so these really ephemeral, wonderful moments that just cause his portfolio to sparkle with a certain kind of, it has a shimmer that wouldn't be there, I don't think, otherwise if he weren't doing that. And that's just the way he works. And he's also a great craftsman, and he's able to pull this all together in a way that it looks like it was shot on a tripod. So it's really important to just keep in mind that, you know, sometimes it's best not to let that little voice in your head tell you that you're doing it wrong, you know, even when you're going against received wisdom that you truly respect. So again, this desert image is one of those for me that I have to say, well, that rainbow dropped down into my frame again, and here that rainbow just sort of stuck around. Can I take credit for that? I don't know. I brought myself out into this environment, into this storm, and I shot in those conditions. Maybe I should allow myself to take some credit. And in that sense, it emboldens you. Again, with this one, I like these kinds of echo compositions where I have the repeating V shape. Can I take credit for that? That the atmosphere just happened to do a V on the left that echoed the one on the right? Not really, but I did recognize it. I did appreciate it, and it's something that I really respond to and that I find personally satisfying. And another event when I somehow wandered down found this scene when I wasn't even looking for it. I was supposed to be shooting the other direction. Supposed to, according to what I had set myself out to do. And I found this scene that I really enjoyed looking the other direction. Do I take credit for that either? It was totally accidental. Maybe I should. So in summary, it's important to have fun. Number one, really is number one. This day I was having a great time sloshing through the water in my puddle stompers, getting out to these salt formations. Never expected that that's what I was going to go out there to do, is to try to heroize this tiny little salt formation in this way. I usually actually have different ideas about composition entirely, but in this case, this one all came together for me just because I was out there having a great time. Go big. This is a small scene. It's just a little piece of mud at the back of a canyon full of water. I had to, with a couple of my Photo Cascadia teammates, do a 10-mile hike, mostly through water, just a few weeks ago to get this shot, because we had this motivation. When we first got in there, we found these outstanding examples of dried mud, and that just got us going, and nothing was going to stop us. We just kept going until we found more and more and more. And it was a long, grueling hike through the water, but we had a great time and found some wonderful little vignettes of nature like this. Find the tipping point, another example of where the dramatic light killed off all the colors. It killed off the kind of subdued, dusty mood that I really enjoy about the desert. I pulled back and went with this, which I much prefer. And lastly, creativity is a messy place. Starts out that way, and somehow in the end, it all comes together. So that's it. And I hope that by keeping all of these ideas in mind, if any of them resonate with you, you'll be able to follow your own nose, even when you can't really see. Thank you.
Hi, welcome back to the Green Room. I'm joined now by Erin Babnik, who's just, I don't know how to describe it, Erin. You wowed us with the most amazing mountain shots, really. And,
thank you.
I mean, not all mountain shots, but there were an awful lot of pictures in places where I would never dare to walk. Have you always?
Many people, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about going big. You talked about being driven. What drives you to go to those points? That they're inaccessible. They're very inaccessibility?
Yeah, it was gradual. There was a time when I couldn't have done that. I actually had a bit of vertigo when I first started doing this, and was terrified of some of these places, and now I've completely lost it.
Right.
So that's the good news. Vertigo is something that you can just lose, and I did. And now it may actually even be sort of a problem that I'm a little bit less aware of dangers maybe than I should be even.
Right,
but,
okay. Yeah.
But now it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, because you were going along the Via Ferrata in the Dolomites,
Yeah.
and kind of perched on edges that there's no way I would go anywhere near.
Yeah.
You talked about tipping point. You talked about this notion of going past the optimum and coming back. And I know that's certainly something that that I'm aware of in work, and I think it's the way that you refine your approach. But it's also the tipping point changes, does it not?
Oh, I should think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I should hope all of it keeps changing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you become stagnant or something. Yeah.
So the whole thing's dynamic. And
Yeah.
how would you characterize your progression from the early days of? Because you started off as an archaeologist,
Yeah.
somebody who was interested in the environment. You had an interest in art history and all those kind of things. But how would you characterize your change?
I think I've gone through a couple of swings. I started off, because of the archaeological photography, doing something that had to be to some extent fairly illustrative and straightforward, and then I started to get more and more liberated with everything, doing things that were in some ways obscuring what it was that was maybe obvious or illustrative about a place, or in some places really pushing the aesthetics of an image and the processing, or even in the way I was approaching things in the field, such that they look kind of painterly, or they in some small way reference the maker's hand. I don't want to be that present in my images, and so, or at least I don't now, and so I've sort of pulled back from that yet again. And so I think now my images are getting quieter, and so the tipping point for me has moved. Yeah. So
going sort of referring back to Simon Norfolk's talk today, he's talking about the sublime, and there's an interesting cusp there, it seems to me, between the sublime and the spectacular. Which side would you characterize your images on, or is that an unfair question?
I'd like to think I lean towards the sublime myself. The spectacular isn't what interests me so much. Coming out of my art history background, I have a great respect for Hellenistic Greek sculpture, which is known for its sort of profundity and its theatricality, which I'd say was just more on the spectacular sorts of things, but also that it has this sort of deep monumentality and this profoundness about it, and I think that's more at home in the sublime realm.
Yeah.
And that is what resonates for me when I see images. It's not that superficial. At least I think of the spectacular as being on some level kind of superficial. To me, it's much deeper than that.
So, for instance, the desert shots that you were showing, Death Valley shots, and and a number of other shots. You're talking about process. You're talking about with the wind-blown sand across the Sastrugi. You're talking about, well, this is the process that sculpts the mountains.
Yeah.
So you're trying to reference that.
Sometimes that's what interests me. I always have some kind of motivation, even if I'm not really wholly aware of it while I'm in the field. I'm not going to say that I always have this very clear idea. I don't. It is a messy place, and But in the end, when I decide, and I'm in that curatorial process, those ideas come to mind. I'm like, yeah, that's why I want this one, and I want to process this one. I want to put that one out there. It belongs in my portfolio for that reason. But sometimes I do have those motivations very clearly.
There's there was a critic, Alan Zeinrich, I think his name was, who was referencing Cartier-Bresson, the idea of the decisive moment.
Yeah.
And he said the decisive moment was when Cartier-Bresson pointed at a negative and said, print that one. The editing process is the decisive moment, I think.
I would agree.
And I think we make a lot of subconscious choices during the making of a photograph. In fact, I think for me, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but for me, the photographs that seem most complete are quite often the ones that you just felt.
Yeah.
You made it, and then afterwards you work through the process of fine-tuning it or choosing which particular frame.
Absolutely. Agree.
Yeah.
Yes, agree completely.
It's a novel feeling for me. We have a question for you from Brianna Wolf.
Okay. Hi, Brianna.
She would like you to describe your style and an ancillary clause. How do you explore new styles in landscape photography?
How do I explore new styles? Let's go back to describing my style. I think we've just done a pretty good job of that, actually, in talking about the sublime. But I also have, I think, coming from a background that's really steeped in the arts, I have some very set ideas about composition. And so I mentioned this in my talk, but I do respond very much to these ideas of sort of discourse going on in the landscape. I see mountains as in some way anthropomorphic. I see them as in some way being in dialogue with other elements. They're like abstract sculptures in a landscape, and in that sense they have that monumentality about it. And I think if there's one thing I probably lock onto the most in my images, it is kind of that sense of monumentality. Even when I'm working on something that's not that monumental, like a little bit of mud.
Yeah.
To me, there's something kind of profound about it. And that's, I think, as far as I can go, is just describe what's really at the heart of my style. And that plays out in both the composition and also in the choice of areas that I go to, and all of that comes together. And in my processing, I try to bring that together, what it is that I find about it that kind of resonates and hums on that kind of more.
I'm really glad that you described your
level.
style in that way, because so many people describe style as about the graphic nature of the image, as about choice of palette, choice of forms, choice of subject. But you are going to the heart of what style is, and that is what concerns the individual photographer or artist.
I think so. For me, at any rate, it is.
Yeah, I don't think style is anything else. It's stylism is something else. When you see people aping
something
away
that is stylized.
But if your images are truly speak to what you're about, then that's where true style comes from.
I'm glad you agree. We're quite in agreement today.
So that puts the ancillary clause in an interesting position, doesn't it? So how do you explore new styles? I'm going to posit. No, I'm going to let you answer that.
Well, yeah.
And then I'm going to posit something.
You explore yourself is the short answer to that. I mean, I don't. Although we had a discussion yesterday about the idea of looking at other people's work, and I am a great proponent of the idea that this is a healthy thing to do. And I think that's one way of exploring styles, is look at a lot of photography, and if something catches you, I don't mean just catches your eye, but catches you to where you want to, in some way, sort of work through that, that's telling you something about yourself. And I think it's a healthy thing to pursue it and work through it. And if you stick with it and you just sort of go big on that, eventually you will come out of that. So that's how I feel style happens.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a good description. Ansel Adams, I think, said that he was never really very interested in other people's photographs, because if he'd like that, he'd be making those kind of pictures. So
Did you say that?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Well, I'm paraphrasing, but yeah, more or less. And I think that the only way you explore new styles is to find new things that interest you, and that is
One
about
route
exploring
in.
yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there because we've got a few more bits and pieces to do. But thank you very much. Very thoughtful answers and very thoughtful talk. Thank you very much indeed,
Thank you,
Erin.
David.